Oh, it was amazing. I waited for 45 minutes backstage. She did this concert with Dutoit once and it's back with the Philadelphia Orchestra. And I was a huge fan when I was a kid. And so a friend and I waited after the concert backstage at the stage door, and everybody had left. The entire orchestra was gone. They were closing down the grounds, and I thought, oh, that's it. And then she emerged in the last moment, so we got to take a picture with Martha Argerich, which of course, I mean, she's just legendary, so incredible.
Hi everyone, welcome to OSA Backstage. I'm Danny Meyer, that's Oa. In the background is a trombone practicing, and on today's episode, Serena and I are talking with Maestro Lidiya Yankovskaya. So excited to have her come to Omaha next week. You may remember her from an almost entirely French program just a few years ago. She's back to continue our Bluebeard Blitz, and I dare you to say that 3 times fast. Lidiya is fascinating. I'm pretty sure I have never met someone who has joyfully tackled as much as she is currently and has always apparently been tackling. I don't think the woman sleeps. And this program is right up her alley. So we're excited to have her here. We're excited for you to hear this conversation and enjoy. Would you please introduce yourself?
I am Lidiya Yankovskaya, and I'm looking forward to conducting the Omaha Symphony very soon.
Where did music start for you?
Where did music start for me? Music started for me before I can remember. My mom is a great music lover, so we always had all kinds of music playing in our home. I was always surrounded by music. And I started out myself as a pianist and violinist and as a singer in a very intensive children's choir, the St. Petersburg Choir of Radio and Television in St. Petersburg, Russia, where I was born. And those were my first introductions to music making.
Of radio and television, does that mean that you were part of a children's choir that actually sang for broadcast?
They did, yeah. So the choir sang for broadcast. We performed at various halls when we started out, and but most of it was just, especially at that younger age when I started out, it was mostly about intensive rehearsals 3 times a week and a lot of performing, which was really marvelous and made me think about music really deeply and made me appreciate the kind of rigor that music requires from a very young age.
Did you know how intense it was as a kid, or was it only like looking back that you were like, oh my God, the rehearsals we went through? Or
I mean, it was for me as a kid, it was all really joyful. I always just loved expressing myself through music. Now, but in Russia, the music education system, especially at that time, was quite different than it is in the United States. And when you chose to play an instrument, first of all, you would have lessons twice a week and they would be an hour each. It was unthinkable that a little kid would be required to just practice entirely on their own for an entire week. And I think actually in the US, it creates major disparities to access, not just because of the costs of lessons and other things, but because if you don't have parents who can teach you how to practice when you're really young, it's very difficult to self motivate in that way. I think actually it's an unreasonable expectation. And so when you have lessons twice a week and each is an hour, then you only have a couple of days in between to keep working through your craft. And also, everybody had to play in an ensemble. For me, it was in this, I sang in this specialized children's chorus on the side. If your principal instrument was not piano, mine was, but if it wasn't piano, you also took piano as a secondary instrument. So everybody had to learn to think vertically and to think harmonically. I think so often now musicians are just alone in a room practicing just their solo instrument, and that's not what ensemble playing is about. And we also had to take music theory classes, which at that point were actually primarily keyboard harmony. And again, it forces you to think about how music is created in a different way. And for me, those were all really even that early on getting those opportunities was really formative to how I continued to make music. And so when my family immigrated to the United States, I continued to play piano and violin. I played violin in orchestras. I sang in choirs. I accompanied choirs. But it made me think of music as this more holistic, bigger thing. It wasn't just about playing my instrument and perfecting my technique on that instrument. It was about the communal idea of music making.
So everything, I love the idea of you're learning the 360-degree aspect of it from go, as opposed to trying to find how all those pieces fit together when your brain is maybe less malleable. Did you like was your mom, was anybody in your family also able to sit at the piano with you or sit in your violin lessons with you? Did they have that same background?
Yeah, so my mom sang also and played piano when she was young. She ended up becoming an engineer, but I think she always kind of wished that she had pursued music. And she studied music very seriously until her university years. And so she came to all my lessons, and she was extremely supportive. And it was always a top priority to make sure that I had access to any music making that I wanted to do. And that was absolutely critical. And I think it was less about anyone sitting and practicing with me. She did it early on, but actually very soon I didn't like it when she practiced with me. So as a kid, I really resented it and I wanted to do it on my own. So very quickly, I made sure that I got to practice on my own and learn things kind of on my own in my own way. But the one thing that was really critical is that she brought me to performances all the time, all kinds of really high level performances. And we lived first in St. Petersburg, of course, where there's just so much music making and so much access to it. And then we moved to the Albany area, Albany, New York, and
Mm.
it's an hour from Tanglewood. Saratoga Performing Arts Center is there, which was the summer home of the Philadelphia Orchestra. Also, all of these recitals, because it's so close to New York City and there are a number of venues there. I remember seeing recitals with Yefim Bronfman and Emmanuel Ax and Martha Argerich, and all of these people would come, and I would get to see them often in very intimate environments and sometimes talk to them after the concerts. And that was really critical to my also developing an ear for kind of what music could sound like.
Oh man. I am just trying to imagine getting to meet Martha Argerich. I think I would explode.
Oh, it was
Um,
amazing. I waited for 45 minutes backstage. She did this concert with Dutoit once and it's back with the Philadelphia Orchestra. And I was a huge fan when I was a kid. And so a friend and I waited after the concert backstage at the stage door, and everybody had left. The entire orchestra was gone. They were closing down the grounds, and I thought, oh, that's it. And then she emerged in the last moment, so we got to take a picture with Martha Argerich, which of course, I mean, she's just legendary and I think so incredible.
did this mean, okay, was this your whole world, or were you still looking at other interests as well at the same time?
Not at all. I actually, I mean, or let me put it this way. When I had the choice, I always did music and I spent a lot of my time on music, but I wasn't particularly encouraged to go into music as a career. Quite the opposite. It was seen as quite impractical. And I actually wasn't certain that I was going to go into music until late into my university years. It's just that's where I ended up putting my time. But I mean, I did many things, and I've always been really interested in various intellectual pursuits. I've been really interested in languages. When I was a kid, I also was serious about art, and I did sports, and I did all kinds of things. But I would say that music ended up taking up the largest amount of my time.
So what was the turning point then as the beautiful calico descends the stairs behind you?
Do
What was
you
the
still have like nine cats, by the way?
only seven, unfortunately,
Only
but
seven now. Wow.
no calicos in our collection. But what's okay, so I've read the story about how you were performing the Mozart piano concerto and your conductor asked you to lead. Was it before or after that moment that music became the path?
So when I was 17, I was asked by my youth orchestra conductor to conduct. I was invited to conduct. I had been playing a concerto with the orchestra and leading rehearsals from the piano. And so he invited me to conduct, which was really remarkable. And when I got on the podium, it really felt right. As I said, piano was my main instrument, but I never really wanted to be a pianist. I spent a lot of time playing piano, but I found it really lonely. You, as a pianist, especially, there are just so many notes. So you're spending, and I love playing. I still play for myself when I can, but it's great for an hour. It's great maybe for two. It's not great for 5 to 7 every day, which once you get to a certain level is what you have to do. And so I didn't want to go to pursue a career as a pianist. And when I got on the podium for the first time, I realized that this was the thing I didn't know I was missing. I had never really considered conducting before that. It just wasn't an option that was open to me. And I realized, oh, I love working with other people in this really direct way to create the music. I also found it a lot less stressful. The piano is very stressful. There's so many notes that you have to worry about. And here, in a way, when you conduct, because you're not making the music, you just your job is to kind of usher and help others, bring the best out of others. Let's put it that way, and bring them together as much as you can. And that I find is for me was much more rewarding to just focus on the whole of the music making and putting of the parts together rather than the execution. Also, because I found that when you're focusing on the execution, it's so easy to become perfectionist in it, to become, and you never get there, right? You're always trying to reach this unattainable goal. But when you're conducting, because you're not the one executing in that direct way, it becomes a much more supportive role. And I found that rewarding. But I went on to university because in the United States, as you know, you can't even study conducting on the undergraduate level anywhere. I looked at a bunch of conservatories. I considered going to some major ones, but I just remember touring one major conservatory and they were showing me the music library, and I asked if there's like a regular library nearby. And of course there was, but the tour guide didn't know this. And she said, what would you need a library for? And I thought, well, this is just not me. And that's not to say all kinds of really wonderful intellectual people study music, but that was my impression of the places. And so I went to Vassar College, which is a liberal arts school in upstate New York. And they had, at the time, I don't know if this is still the case, but one of the largest Steinway collections in the world. And amazing music teachers, all of whom also taught at the New York conservatories. So I had an opportunity to really focus on music, but I could study piano and voice and conducting all at the same time. And I could accompany the choirs and I could sing in the opera productions and I could play violin and harpsichord in a Baroque ensemble. And I was able to do, and I was the music theory and then history intern and I taught classes and I could do all of these things.
And not sleep.
And not sleep. I did not sleep. That is absolutely accurate. But I could do all of these things and I could pursue them on a high level. And I could learn big concertos and do that too, where in a conservatory setting, I think, where everybody is really focused on a particular career path and there's so many people competing for the resources, it would not have been possible. And so it allowed me to do all of these things and also study languages and do other things. And for most of my time there, I actually also double majored in philosophy. I ended up dropping the philosophy major at the very end and getting a minor only because I didn't have time to write a thesis while auditioning for conducting programs. So once I got there.
Okay. There's so much there. I want to quickly duck back to something you said the first time you took the podium, which was you got to see a way to bring out the best in everybody else being in this more supportive role. And so I'm super curious, did you see that mindset embodied by your teachers over the next 4 years at Vassar, did you see that mindset in the orchestras and the guest artists you got to watch in the various performances you got to go see? Where was that best emulated for you so that you could carry that forward?
I think more than anything from my conducting teacher in high school and the conductor of the orchestra. His name is Jeff Herkenroder. He was a spectacular double bassist who went to Eastman, then I think Juilliard, I can't remember, then ended up working in Europe and then coming back and teaching high school. And he was so overqualified in so many ways for this, but he was such an experienced musician who was there just for the joy of the music making and had no ego and really treated us like human beings with equal ability to express ourselves. He never talked down to us, and it was always a really collaborative process. And I think all of my teachers were like this. We also had an amazing choral program where, again, I sang, I played, and I had teachers who really were supportive and collaborative. And so when I got on the podium for the first time, they also set up this environment where they actually, rather than sometimes the student conductor thing happens, and we never had student conductors, by the way, this was not a thing that was ever done. He just offered it to me that one time. And normally, since then, when I've seen that happen, it's, oh, you get 10 minutes to put together this short little piece. And in this case, he gave me a movement of a symphony and he gave me extra time. He created actually extra sectionals even outside of class for students to come together and to rehearse, and an environment where all of my peers were really supportive of what I was doing and felt like they were helping me, not like I was put into some position to tell them what to do. And I think that was key. But to add to that, it was also after that, once I received my conducting degree also, and in a way, I saw that there. But when I really got to experience it in practice is very early in my career, I ran a new music ensemble for a number of years, and it was a chamber music ensemble, really, really top-notch musicians who were just so skilled. And we were all of about the same age. Most of them were older than I was actually when we started out. And it was this really collaborative chamber environment because there were only, for many pieces, there'd be 7 or 8 people or 12 maybe or 13. And so it was a really collaborative back and forth. That's hard to do with a symphony orchestra in real life, but that also can happen without words when you're working with a big orchestra. And I think that's also where I really learned just how much back and forth there is in the moment when we make music together.
That's so cool. And I was obviously, when you got to Boston and you're starting this new music ensemble and you started a refugee centric orchestra as well. But it sounds like you at no point have you ever been like, I need to stop doing things.
No. And I was very lucky to land in Boston. I ended up in Boston because I got into Boston University on a full ride, which rarely happens in the music world and was really important for me. And they also told me that I can study both choral and orchestral conducting at the same time, which was also something that interested me. But it was an amazing opportunity because Boston at the time had 5 conservatories letting people out every year, only 2 conducting programs among those. And one was really tiny and very much geared only on standard symphonic repertoire. And the other one, which was at Boston University, was kind of the biggest program at the time. But it was also really kind of core repertoire focused. And I wanted to do new music and I wanted to do opera. And nobody was doing new music or opera in the area, and it wasn't encouraged. In fact, it was, I would say, both things were actively discouraged by my professors at the time, who thought that one should only study a standard repertoire in a very specific vein. And so I had these opportunities to just conduct everywhere, all kinds of things, weird new music things and operas and musicals and traditional repertoire and all kinds of ensembles, and work with really spectacular musicians. and just to try it, to do the thing. Because the problem with conducting is I can sit in my room as long as I want and look at the score, but it's a totally different thing than being in front of an ensemble, and you can't really learn the thing until you're doing it.
What's the argument against what would be the argument against learning to conduct new music or opera? The only one I can think of is that at a certain age, conductors are telling their students that if they can't conduct the classics, that they have no business attempting the new stuff. But I honestly am very curious if anyone gave you an argument or if it was just like, this is how it is, therefore this is how the program is run.
No, they didn't. It actually wasn't what you think, because in school, what we were learning was all the standard repertoire. And when I went to workshops and also that's all I did, it was that it was impractical. The idea was that why would you waste your time on this new music stuff when ultimately what you're going to be conducting is, I don't know, Beethoven and Brahms? Why would you even spend your time on that? Or I remember one of the best classes, academic classes I took in graduate school was a class on Bartók string quartets. That was really spectacular. The professor was spectacular. We studied all of them in depth. We had a drop the needle test on the Bartók string quartets, which I don't recommend to anybody. But it was really fantastic. But I remember one of my advisors at the time saying, why would you take this class? You're never going to conduct those pieces. Right? Or so the idea was that it's only useful, I don't know, for string players who are going to be in a quartet. I think it was about practicality, and the same with opera. Opera is seen, I think, amongst especially kind of teachers of conducting or amongst some conductors, you put in months of work, often sitting in a rehearsal room collaborating with a director, with singers, and it's months for the same number of performances often, where many more things can go wrong. Also, so you can't just rely on, oh, you're going to have an orchestra in a more or less nice space and you can make music. There's always something in opera. And for me, actually, and you get also, you get paid the same for those months of work often as you do for a week with an orchestra. So there's this idea that why would you go into that? But actually, it is much more challenging as a conductor. If you can conduct opera, you can conduct symphonic repertoire because of some of those things I mentioned. And also the collaborative aspect is exceptionally rewarding. So those were the main arguments. Luckily, I didn't listen to them, much as my advisors thought I was being very impertinent. I mean, I still did everything they asked me for in school, but I continued to do new music. I continue to do opera. I continue to do all kinds of also weird collaborative projects across genres. And I learned an immense amount out of that. And actually, I was supposed to, when I went to school, I was supposed to be in an accelerated doctoral program where I would immediately go into my doctorate. And I did all of the coursework, but I decided not to finish the doctorate because I was learning so much more from doing the things that I was doing outside of the academic program.
Okay. That makes me so happy and fascinates me so much because Serena has heard this a million times. I like months ago finished Harold Schoenberg's The Great Conductors. And while that stops in the 60s and it reads like a book that was written in the 60s, the information, we seem to have conveniently forgotten that it was not that long ago that composers had their like conductor proteges, these little ducklings that followed them, and they were the only ones that they trusted with music that had just barely existed for more than 5 minutes at a time, right? And so now this concept of like, well, why would you bother with anything that was written after Brahms' time makes me want to tear my own hair out. And the fact that opera is lumped within that is a little bit horrifying. It's like we have quickly forgotten about 200 years worth of history really fast. So I'm glad that I hopefully is changing. Serena, I'm curious, you were nodding quite a bit. Did you feel like you were hearing similar arguments?
I Absolutely. I think sometimes also we or our teachers maybe weren't working at kind of the same time that we're living in now, where there's new music on almost every program. And it's its own unique challenge. It's something that we will spend a lot of time, a lot of your career doing. I agree that it's an essential part now to making a career in classical music, and I think the earlier the better too, because of the unique challenges, and it'll all inform and help each other. You know, the skills you learn in opera and in conducting contemporary music will only be helpful when you're doing the standard symphonic. And I think I absolutely agree also in the same way, where you're taking a class on Bartók's string quartets, but ultimately any knowledge, any music class is going to be helpful in all the music that you do. And we recently recorded another podcast doing a deep dive on Bartók's Bluebeard's Castle. And I was just wondering, you're talking about this particular course. Did you also find that, this particular course on Bartók's string quartet, I'm not sure when it was written, but do you find that that general knowledge and study and research that you've done informs how you now perform a work that is applicable to your career?
Absolutely. And I think Bartok is especially interesting because he wrote so many different kinds of things. The string quartets, which are highly non-tonal and have serialist qualities to them. Bluebeard's Castle, which is a very romantic operatic work in many ways. The folk dances, which are arrangements of folk music. All of the transcriptions he did, the vocal music also that he's written. And I think with any composer, it's so important to be aware as much as possible of the full canon of work because it informs so much. For instance, let's take someone like Brahms, understanding his songs and his vocal music, or understanding his chamber music, I think drastically impacts how you perform the symphonies. Or Tchaikovsky, who wrote symphonic music that is so differently written from how he wrote his ballets, that is so differently written from how he wrote his operas. And I think understanding that whole and how it fits together is absolutely key. And in particular, again, because we have a program here that involves both opera and the symphony, understanding that all music came from singing. The voice is the original instrument. And in particular for these composers, for someone like Bartók, who studied folk song so closely, understanding how song influences the instrumental writing is key to how you shape phrases, how you think about shape over the course of a work.
And that's actually a great seg into talking about Bluebeard, because one of the things that we talked extensively about, we have a musicologist is our assistant librarian, and we have a theorist and composer who writes our program notes. And so that is a fun group to get together to talk music with. They were saying that Bartók's, because he is writing in Hungarian, the way Bluebeard's Castle is written for the voice and for the orchestra has to bend to Hungarian cadences in the Hungarian language. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's a really fascinating topic in general because language shapes so much of how we approach rhythm, how we approach phrasing, how we approach even melodic shape. To give some really simple examples for people who haven't thought about this very much, for instance, Italian as a language, it tends to go up and then down when you speak, right? And that shapes how musical phrases are shaped in Italian music. German tends to have very, very long sentences with the point of the sentence not being clear until the end. And you hear that in German symphonic music, the way phrases are shaped. Often it's long, 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 and it's only at the end that you figure out where we're going. A Russian tends to have the most important word at the very end of the sentence often. So the phrases, and often things go down at the end of the sentence. So the highest intonation isn't necessarily the most important word. And so again, you have a different kind of shaping. At Czech, the stress is always on the first syllable of a word, and the beginning of a sentence gets the emphasis. I'm right now actually next week I'm conducting Dvorak 7, which I do a lot. I'm doing it with the London Philharmonic, and it's always just so remarkable to me. If you get that right, the start of each phrase having this brightness and then kind of a coming away, then it's brilliant. And if you don't, and it gets too heavy or feels Germanic, it doesn't work. And that's the case for so many of these pieces. And Hungarian is tricky. Like Czech, for instance, the stress is on the first syllable, but it's not so emphatic as it is in Czech. And it has these long and short vowels also, and a kind of up and down to the language that influences how everything's placed. But when you're writing an opera, when a composer is writing an opera, the first thing they get is the libretto and this storyline. Right before they write music, they have the words. So inevitably, the words end up shaping how the music is written. If you get a chance, we hear this, for instance, in pop music. American pop music relies on American text being spoken a certain way and then put into song a certain way. And sometimes you'll hear American pop songs either translated into another language, or if you hear other countries trying to imitate the style. This happens to me sometimes. I'll hear a pop song in another language that tries to imitate an American popular music style, and you just it's like you can't quite understand the words, or something feels off, because the language has its own music. When we speak, there are specific words we emphasize, there are ways that we structure the sentences, and that is what defines the phrasing. And Bluebeard's Castle, also, Bartók is just so brilliant in studying the text and being really aware of when to give the singers freedom to deliver the text in their own time, which also becomes part of the phrasing and part of the musical makeup, on when to dictate it very specifically. And it's tricky because it's not a language that is as widely spoken and studied as, say, German or French or Italian or English. And so it presents an extra challenge for the singers as well, and for the conductor, because we have to really not only understand what every single word means and what we want to bring out in the text, but we also have to internalize the music of the language when we perform it.
And when you're working with someone, so we have two veterans coming in to sing this with us. We have Ryan McKinney, who we've never worked with here, but I'm so excited for him, and Michelle de Jong, who did Mahler's Das Lied von der Erde with us. Oh my God. To say she's an Amazon is to still do her injustice, right? She's a goddess amongst mezzo sopranos. But when you have people like this singing the role, and they're already veterans, not just of opera, but of these roles, what do you bring to the table? What do they bring to the table? How do the three of you come together when it's literally a 3-person command center for the piece?
Yeah, well, it's an extremely collaborative process. And that's why in opera, even in a concert staging like this, we have a lot of time in the room where it's just us kind of exploring the piece, because the most important thing is that we're all telling the same story. Mm-hmm. And because if we're not telling the same story, we'll be bringing out we will be emphasizing different things. We won't shape things the same way, and it'll feel disjunct, and the audience won't even quite know why. Mm-hmm. And what we bring to that story can be very different. And when working with singers, I find that it's absolutely critical that whatever their interpretation is of the character, that it is authentic to them. That if I try to force on them some sort of approach or interpretation, or even vocal color, because the voice is such a part of who you are, that isn't authentic. That doesn't mean that they don't have flexibility, and these are fantastic singers, so have a great deal of flexibility. That range is quite wide. But beyond that, they are using literally their bodies and their selves to present these characters on stage. So whatever they bring to the character has to feel like it comes from them innately. And then my job becomes for all of us together to connect that to interpretive choices that are dictated by what's in the score and what's in the orchestra. That makes sense. And also to make sure that we're all on the same page, because if the UDIT feels strongly that this is a feminist interpretation of a woman taking charge and of her own destiny and grabbing all the keys and opening all the doors, and the Bluebeard feels that this is an interpretation of masculine control of his wife and choosing to ensnare her into his trap. I'm just making things up, obviously, but if it's those two opposing forces that come together, there are ways to reconcile that, but that will be tricky, because musically it means phrasing in very different ways, bringing things out in different ways, coloring things in very different ways.
It's kind of like an improv group where one person just decides at some point they're going to like have a shootout, and no one else has seen that in the prompt. So,
yeah, but you have to play along, right? So even if it is, let's say, those two contrasting ideas, then the point of the story has to become those two, that dichotomy, those two forces fighting against each other. So it's finding that unified through line.
Well, have you already discussed this with Ryan and Michelle, or is this going to be when we get boots on the ground in Omaha next week? You'll start that discussion then.
We're going to do it on the ground. It depends on the piece. There are some situations and some productions where I would do that in advance. I think with this one, because it is so character driven, this story, it's less driven by the big concept. For instance, in a big operatic production, especially for something more abstract, you may need to make that clear. But I think here it'll be mostly about what do they bring to the characters, because they've already spent time on other productions of Bluebeard's Castle. They probably each have their own clear idea of how they see the characters. So I think it'll be about coming in the room, discussing that, finding a way to reconcile those interpretations, guiding them through what I think also the piece is about, because it also has to feel authentic to me. And that's the trick of it, because also if I don't buy into the interpretation, can be a trick with opera, because often you're working with a stage director. And if I don't, I also have to perform it and guide it and believe in it. And if I don't buy where we're going or the choices that we're making, then it also won't feel genuine. So, and again, all of us come with flexibility. All of us come with various options and ideas of where it can go that are guided by the score. And it's bringing all of those things together into one.
Do you remember the first time that you experienced Bluebeard?
The first time that I experienced Bluebeard, I think the first time I remember, but I think I'd heard parts of it before, but I saw a performance of it that the Boston Symphony did when I don't know if I was still in grad school. I was working. I worked for a little bit as a course master with the Boston Symphony for a few years. So maybe it was during that period. But they did this really, really wonderful performance of Bluebeard's Castle. Honestly, I can't even remember who was conducting or who was singing. I just remember the experience of the piece and how impactful it was.
Do you have, I mean, you did say like you have to feel it's authentic to you. Before you get to Omaha, what's your background for what is taking place in Bluebeard's Castle?
Yeah, that's a good question. And to me, the piece, because it's there's a lot that's left unclear and unsaid in the work. And to me, it's not so much about the specific people on the stage. I think it's a big metaphor for the stages of life. Bluebeard, in the end, it's revealed that he has this kind of, his three wives come out, and one is the morning, and one is the afternoon, and one is the evening. And we often see this in literature and different traditions, that the morning represents your youth. Then you have the afternoon, which is your prime, and your evening, and then death. And in a way, I think Bluebeard, I think it's a metaphor for the kinds of walls that we build up around ourselves sometimes throughout the course of our lives, how we might let go of those walls eventually. I think for many people, a lot of life is about building something, and for some, it's about enclosing themselves maybe over the course of our lives. And then when people enter old age and come towards the ends of their lives, they tend to also let go of some of those things that have shackled them, and often try to find a release to examine everything that they've been through. So to me, it's a lot about that. It's about Judith coming in and learning about this man and his life on this journey with him. And perhaps Judith is not even a person. She is his old age, and she's a vehicle through which we can go on that journey with him.
I think you actually perfectly also described Beethoven 5 for me in a way just now. This idea of starting off with this horrendous struggle, feeling extremely constricted and like bashing yourself against the walls of something, and then gradually letting go. And this transformation across the symphony. We have been kind of internally joking that this program is darkness to light to darkness. And how will you I guess my question is, before this concert starts, before this cycle starts, you have symphony first half, opera second half. And that symphony is this Beethoven 5. Mentally, what are you doing to prepare for both halves? Or are you just, is there no separation? Is it just, this is the work that we are doing?
Yeah, I Beethoven 5, that was one of the reasons, my reasons for putting the two together. It's that it really is, it's about, I mean, we talk about fate, but it's really about that life cycle, that struggle. That's why I think those two pieces come in tandem in a way, and have these parallels, but they're also vastly different. I think Bluebeard, it's much more internal and nuanced in a way. And so there's also, I think that Beethoven 5 presents us with these themes more directly. I think extremely directly at the beginning. It's clear, it's fate knocking at your door. You can't avoid it. We hear it over and over and over again, this 4-note motive, which then develops and contrasts something entirely different in the second movement. Something calm, maybe playful, something else entirely, then expansive, right? Third movement, I think to me, the third movement in particular is just so unexpected and brilliant and dark in a way. And it goes somewhere where we're uncertain, where we're searching. It's constantly searching, or then or maybe sometimes it stands still, which again, I think that brings us actually closer and closer to Bluebeard with each one, because in Bluebeard we have those same kinds of moments of stillness or repetition or searching or seeking something out. And also in the third movement, the basses are very prominent, cellos and basses, and also basses alone. And in Bluebeard's castle, the bass instruments, also in particular the double basses, are key. They start and they end the piece, and it's about finding this grounding, however, also sometimes uncertainty, but mostly grounding, as opposed to in Beethoven, where we're searching for something. And then at the end, triumph and wide openness, which we hear in Bluebeard as well, but only for moments. And in the middle of the piece, that fifth door is like an even bigger version of what we hear in Beethoven. And so again, it follows, I think, in a way, the life cycle of any person. Moments of calm and joy, moments of anxiety, moments of fear, perhaps, and moments of just triumph and enjoyment in the moment.
What would you ask your audience, if you could give your audience like listening homework or even just mental homework to do before they walk into the hall, what would you suggest for them?
I'm not sure about listening homework. I think it may be useful. I think it's useful to read the libretto to Bluebeard's Castle before you come in. It's very short. It would probably take someone 10 minutes to read. The reason for that is just so that in the moment, they don't have to worry about reading the titles and adding, because it's always another thing that you're adding, that you're trying to translate the text. And that's always a really interesting thing, because we perform it in the language of the audience. Yes, in many ways that can be really helpful. In other ways, the language, as we spoke earlier, is such a part of the music itself, which is why now we usually perform in the original language and provide titles. But I think that's helpful, because then in the moment they can just look at the singers and listen to the music and take it in and go on this journey with the singers, rather than having an extra intermediary between those experiences.
Love that. I think we only have one more question for you today. And you were rattling off the list of interests and things that you've studied. So this might be difficult to pick something new, but if you had 30 minutes on opera stage or an orchestra stage, no consequences whatsoever, and you could try anything, what is left? Lidiya Yankovskaya, what is left for you to try?
Oh, there's so many things. You sent me this question in advance, and I was thinking, this is so difficult to answer. I will tell you that one thing I love to do just on my own in my living room when I have like people over for dinner is that my husband and I will sing like Broadway and pop songs and jazz standards, and I'll play and sing stuff and Disney songs and the whole thing. So I find that to be super fun, and I would probably want to lead the audience in a sing along to like songs that everybody knows that are pop songs, or again anything, musical theater, you name it, jazz. And I would say either that or I'm really not good at it, but if I were a good dancer, I would love to I'm not a good dancer, but I would love to like have opportunities to do crazy wild dancing. I think that would also be fun. Or I'd want to, there's also so many things I don't know how to do that I'd love to learn. You know, life is endless, but near where I live, there's a fencing club. I've always thought it would be so cool to learn how to fence, do like maybe Chevalier de Saint George and then fencing demonstration. I don't know. But there are so many things I would love to do. But I would say in terms of things that I actually can kind of do, not at a professional level, but that I like to do would be sing-alongs to pop tunes and Broadway tunes.
I just have this image of you calling Ryan and Michelle back on stage for bows and then leading the audience in Sweet Caroline as kind of like this like benediction of the audience after.
I think that would be great. It would be quite a contrast to the end of Bluebeard's Castle, which is really descent into darkness. Suddenly something else entirely.
Perfection. Thank you so much. This was wonderful. We're really looking forward to working with you in a few weeks.
Thank you both. Can't wait to be there. Looking forward to it. So nice to meet you, Serena. Great to meet you again.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.